Tom Sleigh writes, "No one sounds like she does, and her concern about the post in postconfessional is as much a sign of her earnest desire to honor every aspect of her art as it is an anxiety that spurs her restless investigations of family, selfhood, racial identity, and erotic life." In the new collection, these investigations noted by Sleigh intertwine with larger ecological explorations to illustrate the ambivalence with which we approach all of our relationships. In a recent interview about Animali, Rekdal reconciles the juxtaposition of the pastoral and the macabre in the poems by saying, "For me, the pastoral isn't simply Arcadian. Even in Arcadia, there is death. When you walk past a deer carcass eviscerated by coyotes or left there by hunters too lazy to clean up after their kill, it's hard to look at the canyons around you as untouched reserves of natural beauty." We find in the poems an Eden that, like the deer above, has been eviscerated and wasted. On the 50th anniversary of Carson's Silent Spring, Rekdal's book and poems offer us a similar catalog of ecological horrors and a reminder that we've learned little in the intervening years. We fare no better sociologically as racism and ignorance illustrate how we treat one another a little better, how we treat one another is little better than how we treat the world around us. Nonetheless, Rekdal finds the pastoral within these episodes, noting that there is so little distinction between beauty, violence, utility. We find that such contrast in poems like Arctic Scale, in which oil rigs that dip their certain needles in the Inuit women's breast milk has been declared hazardous waste, then gives way to a wall-sized field of green with patches of corn silk. Here is a miraculous range seamed with what I have to be told is coal, the enormous glassy sea chattering its blue to the sky, the glacier clasped between them quietly disappearing. These more romanticized moments in nature are always counteracted by the market values and human practices that threaten them. This friction is an all too vivid reminder that our longing to establish relationships and a shared sense of beauty, whether with one another or through figurative language, is overshadowed by our failure to grasp and interact with the larger ecological relationships on which our survival depends. Paisley Rekdal is the author of three previous poetry collections: The Invention of the Kaleidoscope, A Crash of Rhinos, and Six Girls Without Pants, as well as a memoir, Intimate, an American Familyh Photo Album, and a book of essays, The Night My Mother Met Bruce Lee. She is the recipient of the Village Voice Writers on the Verge Award, the University of Georgia Press Contemporary Poetry Series Award, an NEA Fellowship, a Fulbright Fellowship, the Laurence Goldstein Poetry Prize for Michigan Quarterly Review, and the 2011-2012 Amy Lowell Poetry Traveling Scholarship. She teaches at the University of Utah. Please welcome Paisley Rekdal.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for inviting me again, Michael. I'm really honored to be reading tonight and then also reading with Kathy Wagner because I've been following her work for quite a while, so I'm looking forward to this. This is my set list. It's very clear, and I will actually time myself so I don't go over. It's always funny to hear people talk about this book because I didn't realize how, dark a world I've just portrayed and that we're all going to hell. But most of the poems tonight I was planning to read were a bit, I guess they are macabre pastorals. And with that, I will start. I should also say that this is kind of an odd experience to read from this book because I've been out of the country for a year, and the book came out in the interim. So actually, this is sort of the first time I've read from this book, and it's one of the first times I've actually touched this book. So if I stare kind of longingly at it, it's because I just met it. Why some girls love horses. And then I thought, can I have more of this? Would it be possible for every day to be a greater awakening? More light, more light. Your face on the pillow with the sleep creases rudely fragmenting it. Hair so stiff from paint and sheetrock it feels like the dirty short hank of mane I used to grab on Dandy's neck before he hauled me up and forward. White flanks flecked green with shit and the satin of his dander, the livingness, the warmth of all that blood just under the skin and in the long, thick muscle of the neck. He was smarter than most of the children I went to school with. He knew how to stand with just the crescent of his hoof along a boot toe and press incrementally his whole weight down. The pain, so surprising when it came, its iron intention sheathed in stealth, the decisive, sudden twisting of his leg until the hoof pinned one's foot completely to the ground. We'd have to beat him with a brush to push him off, that hot insistence with its large horse eye trained deliberately on us to watch. Like us, he knew how to announce through violence how he didn't hunger, didn't want, despite our practiced ministrations. Too young not to try to empathize with this cunning, this thing that was and was not human we must respect for itself and not our imagination of it. I loved him because I could not love him anymore in the ways I taught myself, watching the slim bodies of teenagers guide their geldings and figure eights around the ring, as if they were one body, one fluid motion of electric understanding I would never feel working its way through fingers to the bit. This thing had a name, a need, a personality. It possessed an indifference that gave me logic and a measure. I too might stop wanting the hand placed on back or shoulder and never feel the desired response. I loved the horse for the pain it could imagine and inflict on me, the sudden jerking of head away from halter, the tentative nose inspecting first before it might decide to relent and eat. I loved what was not slave or instinct, that when you turn to me, it is a choice. It is always a choice to imagine pleasure might be blended, one warmth bleeding into another as the future bleeds into the past, more light, your hand against my shoulder. The image of the one who taught me disobedience is the first right of being alive. Thank you. Who's that? I'll take your ring forever. That poem was written, I always say that was written for my husband, and he loves it. He hates poetry, but he always says, oh, why some girls love horses. So he always shows that poem just for the title to people. La la. I'm going to move between sort of new work and this book. I lived in Vietnam for a little while, and I thought I would get a lot of poems out of it, and I didn't. I didn't get a single poem except maybe for this one, and it's a real stretch. And it's only because there's a reference to mangosteens, and if anyone has ever eaten a mangosteen, it's a bomb of awesome, is all I can say. And here they cost like $10 for a mangosteen, and there it's like, $1 and you get a pound or something, and I just ate myself sick on them, so. Thank you, Amy Lowell. There's one word in this poem for you. A peacock in a cage, shaking out its corona of tail feathers, is like light glowing in a bulb, a man dancing inside an elevator. The space too small to quite contain him, yet contain him it does. The way a cloud keeps some portion of the sea inside it, or a box encloses air, encloses also the philosophical cat, both dead and alive inside it. The way a car inhales the gas containing bones of dissolved dinosaurs, and the cheese breeds mold to heal the cut which holds the hurt cradled inside the body, the blood thick with the trace of all things we might yet express or become, such as the mathlete or music lover who holds first one note and then the next inside her ear. We try to pin the mind's attention to the task at hand, though the mind can sometimes falter, the way a tongue sometimes cannot rein in the word whose meaning may escape it, may be captured so perfectly within its syllables for once, the desire, the surprise, the distaste churn palpably when uttered. Just as the parent's past churns inside the child's future, or the identity of the stranger hides inside the mundane title with which we greet him. There are lies we clasp to ourselves upon waking, truths with which we worry ourselves to sleep, dreams memory struggles to capture in the retelling. Only the ends remain, in which the building crumbles back to dust, or the mother steps naked out of her unzipped skirt, an image which bears the seed of future therapy. One book contains at least a dozen others. The scarlet bitterness of its pith conceals the sweetness of the mangosteen, and when saddest, we suspect everyone embraces someone else, though many don't. We think a woman shelters a house, husband, and a child inside her, that a man might accommodate no one else. The party can hold its liquor only so long as we can maintain faith that requires us to keep two contradictions alive at once, like day and night tucked into the same sunset, or the sudden hatreds ignited by love. The joy with which we hold still for this camera, believing it will shore up time, and knowing it won't. Rhetoric. A woman and man are busy beating a tree that has lost its blossom. The woman and man have the tree's bare branches in their hands. They are hitting the tree to revive it, dislodging the few small birds that have taken up residence, working to make the lost thing once more beautiful to them. The birds don't know. They are strange and useless, non-singing bodies. They open their black-ringed throats, and the sound of their rustling is Cato dragging his silks over the forum stones. Cato, who was so ugly he could make an empire go to war, whose passions became relentless enough, they turned into a project. Still, how wonderful it must have been to have listened to him first. The outrage, the force of that mouth describing the African palace where a dead queen shade still wept in bed, while the soldier who loved her slipped into his abandonment, pocketing a necklace of stones and some of her palace animal's teeth. Did he place this jewelry around his new wife's neck in the hopes of arousing a similar love? Or did he bury it in secret, dreaming that the teeth would turn into armies, plowing their way back to wall up that forsaken room? Every failed desire must be accounted for, Cicero warned. And Cato, remembering the soldier's shame, cried, "The foreign city must be razed." All those beautiful animals. They must have been trapped in the blaze that followed, skins crisped or stripped by the Romans eager for a souvenir. What would the birds, if they could, say of the couple beating that tree? They were young, perhaps. The man wore a hat that looked too small for him. The woman's dress had sweat rings around the neck. They were not inherently cruel, but they were relentless, and their arms, as they brought the blackened branches down through the air, made a whistling that at first sounded just like singing. Where am I? I'm going to read a happy poem. It is my one happy poem, I guess. Actually, this comes from another City Arts reading where someone from, I can't remember who it was, she was talking to me and she said, "You know, you never write any happy poems. All your poems are so sad." And I said, "Well, I can write a happy poem." Yes, I can. So this is it. This is actually not that happy. No, it is happy, but it starts. This is actually sort of a happy but a screw you poem too, because I think it works better that way. But I think many people might have that friend in their life that every time you're happy, they're miserable, and they come over to your house to make you miserable. This is my happy poem for that person. Happiness. I have been taught never to brag, but now I cannot help it. I keep a beautiful garden, all abundance, indiscriminate, pulling itself from the stubborn earth. Does it offend you to watch me working in it, touching my hands to the greening tips, or tearing the yellow stalks back so wild the living and the dead both snap off in my hands? The neighbor with his stuttering fingers, the neighbor with his broken love, each comes up my drive to receive his pitying, accustomed consolations, watches me work in silence a while, rises in anger, walks back. Does it offend them to watch me not mourning with them, but working fitfully, fruitlessly, working the way the bees work, which is to say, by instinct alone, which looks like pleasure? I can stand for hours among the sweet narcissus, silent as a point of bone. I can wait longer than sadness. I can wait longer than your grief. It is such a small thing to be proud of, a garden. Today there were scrub jays, quail, a woodpecker knocking at the white and black shapes of trees, and someone's lost rabbit scratching under the barberry. Is it indiscriminate? Should it shrink back, wither, and expurgate? Should I too not be loved? It is only a little time, a little space. Why not watch the grasses take up their colors in a rush like a stream of kerosene being lit? If I could not have made this garden beautiful, I wouldn't understand your suffering, nor care for each the same inflamed way. I would have to stay only like the bees, beyond consciousness, beyond self-reproach, fingers dug down hard into stone and growing nothing. There is no end to ego with its museum of disappointments. I want to take my neighbor into the garden and show him, here is consolation, here is your pity. Look how much seed it drops around the sparrows as they fight. It lives alongside their misery. It glows each evening with a violent light. So that's happy. This is a short poem. I've been working on a series of sonnets. I finished them, but I won't read, obviously, the whole sonnet sequence. But this I'm particularly proud of because it's a sonnet sequence to Mae West, and each sonnet actually takes one of her one-liners. And all of the words in there have to be either stitched from the letters in the one-liner, or they actually have to be an anagrammatical poem based on the one-liner. So this one took me forever, and I'm just going to read it forever because just every audience I ever have it because it took so long. But her one-liner comes at the very end, and interestingly, a lot of the things that are in here are things that she also advocated. She was a vegetarian, which for some reason shocks the hell out of me. You know, Mae West looks like a meat eater, but she was deeply vegetarian. She was one of the few people very early on to believe that suntanning was verboten, and she was an atheist. So that all these things kind of come up there. Mae West, advice. Ban tobacco. Do bacon a bed. Oh, I guess that's not Mae West. That's me, sorry. Ban tobacco. Do bacon a bed. Be delectable, collectible, a decent debacle. Décolleté, don't conceal, acne do. Be bold and be toned, an octane blonde coed. Be colonel, not cadet. Concede nada to doc. Date a cad and canoodle, be a clat on a cot. Don't lean on a deacon, be a dolt, a clone. Don't bet on an Eden, don't loot, don't loan. Be belle and ball too, a Deb cocoa labeled. Be ocelot, be lancet, be candled and cabled. Cancelled, debated, booed at to boot. Elect to be tall, don't tan, eat local. Be oded, caboodled, be beacon and lect. Don't be a noodle, be cool and collect. I only do that poem just so I can do my Mae West impression. It's just like my favorite thing. 3, if I have it, 3 last poems. Yes, I have, okay. And back into dark. Or at least, I mean my vision actually at this point. It's not the book. Well, maybe it's dark. Okay. A small soul-colored thing. The dog walked out of the forest with a deer in its mouth. No. The deer came out of the forest. The dog ran beside it, over, under. The dog slipped itself into the animal lurching to my side of the road. One of its throats bent back to the sky. One of its spines dissolved to pear white belly. The throat was red, and the long legs looked broken. But I made a mistake. The legs were not broken. And the deer did not appear dead, though it must have been, animated by the dog's hunger so that the deer moved when the dog did, shivered like the soul inside the body, the dog's face all red, which could be the color of the soul. The back of the dog was sleek and brown and expensive looking. When I stared at him, I could see the lawns he must have escaped from, the gravel drive winding down from the hills and the gold tags jangling at his chest, the clean pink flaps of his ears flushed with cold. Now they were froth-covered, and his eyes were glazed with a furious longing. The dog tore at the deer's throat as if he could dig himself inside of it. The dog became a dog again, and I watched him do it, and the deer became something else. It left the soft ash shape of the doe grazing by the bus stop. It abandoned the buck's bright energy leaping over the stone wall that separates my house from the cemetery, its low border taut as a muscle that herds of deer trace in moonlight, cast out of the canyons choked with snow. The deer became some shadow torn between us. Beneath it, the beautiful legs, the elegant ribs twisted into the road. I stopped and watched this wrestling, the dog half deer, the deer half dog, myself poised behind them so as to remain invisible, though a low, slow growl loosed itself at my approach. It entered the deer and reverberated there until its fur grew long and thickened, and its face took on the shape of a lion, a wolf, a bear. It became the shape of a mouth tearing and tearing as I watched it, wanting to take my share of it, kneeling at the walk and putting my mouth to the flesh, letting fur and blood both coat my tongue while my hands reached into the stomach to rip and empty it. I wanted to loose my gray hair out upon my shoulders, to feel antlers grow from bone, letting my own heart be pierced until the soft pulse shivered in the skin. No. The dog tore at the deer's throat, and I watched it. I was the human that could watch it. I was the small, soul-colored thing that wouldn't change. The deer trembled and lay still. It grew slack in the deepening snow. The road disappeared, and the sky turned white. The snow piled up. It kept on falling. Yes, it's true. Before I left, I used to imagine all kinds of stories for myself, all kinds of shapes I could have lived in, the ease of a life in which perfection is a thoughtless miracle, or, more simply, the body of the other man I could imagine leaving for. One story in particular returned to me, seeing my lover at a restaurant with his wife and 2 children, watching the way the wife cuts one child's meat as a waiter pours water, a group of people laughing as they stroll past on the walk. I am not one of those people. I am somewhere above them, in and outside this restaurant, the warm gleam of light that leaps over glass and spoon, the little candle in its dish the youngest child reaches for to shake before he is scolded by my lover, who gets up and walks to the bathroom. He stands before the sink to wash his hands. He leans for the soap, the stack of towels, and I am there suddenly behind him, no longer light or witness, but a pair of hands wrapped around his chest, the hot face pressed into his back. He turns without surprise toward me. And yes, everything after. This is what I dreamed, and later punished myself for. Was there worse that I ignored? Did I mistake the dream for an excuse to act? Was I a liar, heartless, terrified? Was I wrong? Yes, and these are the parts of the mind I do not visit anymore, certain pleasures and justifications, the story I might tell myself about the hero and the conquering and the journey fulfilled. My mind has become the lover I do not visit, knowing the body is not a thought except it is, knowing that action is not a thought except it is, the terror and the joy both generate. Now there is only one story. When the mind asks for it, I tell it yes. I go back to that table and put another face on the lover, the wife, take out children and put in statues, a prince and princess, a rotting apple, a dragon in its cage. I put myself at the table. There is the light on the knife in front of me, my wife talking absently about herself, the small disappointments of being a mother waiting alone for someone else to comfort her. I am sitting and nodding. I am looking at my hands that are my lover's, square and long-fingered and red at every knuckle. I am eating with my lover's mouth. I am not listening with his ears and brain. I don't know what will happen when I get up from that table, if I'll find myself in the bathroom waiting by the tiled wall with the same sad face each stranger wore that year, or with a new one, the one made thin and gray with imagination, the one of absence and desire. I turn to the sink and splash water on my face. I rub my forehead with the towel as a woman's small hands wrap themselves around my chest. I feel nothing for them. I want to be in my own mind now. I want there to be an end to dreaming, to this voice that asks if I want her, if I miss her. Am I ready to leave what's at that table and join a life in which everything is a reflection of wanting? Are you ready for the pain, she asks, as if that's the only thing the mind can ever give us. Water runs into the lines of my mouth. It trickles down my chin through the beginnings of my beard. When she digs her nails into my shirt, I don't reply. I don't ever want to turn and look at her. I have no idea what I'll find. And I'm going to end with one poem, last poem. Obviously, one poem. This one is, this one actually kind of comes fairly recently because I've been going to so many readings. There's just been so many readings. And one of the things that I was listening to when Raul Zorita was here recently, and he gave this amazing reading, but he said something that his Q&A was just amazing. And he said something afterwards in the Q&A that actually gets picked up here as the start of the poem. And I just thought, wow, his answers were like poetry. It was amazing. So this is another love poem. I'm going to tell my husband it's for him, but I had to put my dog down recently, and it's actually for my dog, so don't tell my husband. This is called Mortal Love. If we were immortal, the poet said, like the Greek gods, love would not exist because time ceases to matter. Love needs urgency to be felt at all, at which point I left the hall, hurrying home to cook us dinner and change the bedding, to sit a moment and rest until you came back home to me, thinking all the time of the gods in our stories who, even with eternity to spare, loved, which brought them into the human realms of war and murder, the chaining of lesser beings in pits of flame, the skinning of rivals, and the creation of children, sometimes beautiful, sometimes monstrous, the need for the shapes and skins of animals to disguise their desires, meaning the gods knew guilt too, and shame and jealousy. They knew, as we tell ourselves, about all the human emotions in which love is rooted, self-love and love for spouses, daughters, sons, other people's wives, the love for ex-lovers too, the secret old needs flamed out, but the ashes nursed out of respect for the failure. The gods loved because we wanted them to be like us. No, it is not an excess of time that would keep them from feeling it. Love embroiders time, moving in and out of what we imagine of it, or if we were gods, what of it we would finally know. For them, death is the thing that is expendable, eternity meaning only that suffering can be withstood because it can be forgotten, because we are the ones who must exist in the quick sharpening and dulling of whatever wounds make us human. If we are different from the gods, it is because we are more afraid than them. Our sweet, sad, ordinary pleasures necessary to assuage what can't be forgotten, an instinct where theirs is an indulgence, and so our love is deeper, more frightening, more terrible than theirs. The gods loved, but they loved only as like us as they could. They could never match it. And it is because of all the things they loved, eternity would make them covet most their power and their will. We have these things too, in abundance, but not time, for love doesn't need time at all. Thank you.